So the quarterback battle is Payton Thornes to lose.
You are Locked On Auburn, your daily podcast on the Auburn Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Auburn, your daily Auburn Tigers podcast. I'm your host, Zach Blackerby, and thank you so much for making Locked On Auburn your first listen every single day. We are dapping it up on this Friday. Darrell, Dapprich, Montgomery radio legend, hanging out with us today. And Darrell, as we record this Thursday afternoon, just a little bit after hearing from all sorts of folks, Hugh Freeze, Payton Thorne, Jason Jones, Luke Deal, Rivaldo Fairweather. I wasn't able to hear from Eugene Asante, but a lot of different kind of questions were thrown out there. But obviously, the most important one, I think, was asked to Hugh Freeze specifically about the quarterback battle. Is it really a quarterback battle? Because, Coach, you said it was after the Maryland game. And Darrell, I'm paraphrasing here, but the gist of it was it's Payton Thornes to lose, but every position is open.
Yeah, it was the biggest burning question we had coming into the spring. I'm glad somebody asked it. Is it just word speak? Are you truly going to have an open quarterback competition? I don't feel like the question has been answered still. Just from my perspective and how I look at it, if you are having a true open quarterback competition, you don't have a leader in the clubhouse. You don't have somebody, you don't phrase it as it's somebody's job to lose. That tells you that kind of implies that somebody is in the lead, that somebody is the favorite, and then everybody else has to make up ground. That's an overtaking of a quarterback position, not a true open quarterback position. Now, maybe just semantics and maybe logistics, how I view it, wordplay. But I think everybody comes in with nobody having the leg up, nobody being the favorite to win the job or the heir apparent, and then you're all on equal footing. That's not how I read or took what Hugh Freeze said.
Yeah, the full quote, do I think it's his to lose? Yes, but he's got to go earn it every day. We're not in a position where we can just say that it's given to somebody. But to me, it's like, okay, Payton Thorne is QB1, and if something crazy happens, if he stumbles and Hank Brown or Walker White or Holden Gardner ascend, then that's it. But that's it with literally every position.
Mm-hmm.
But like right now, it does seem like Payton Thorne is QB1, which isn't a major surprise, right? Like incumbency is a big deal. It's probably harder. It's definitely harder to take somebody's job when they've been the starter for a previous season. But the fact that he was that forthcoming does surprise me a little bit. I thought he would go the coach speak route and say, yeah, it's an open competition, and it's like that with every position on the field. That's what I thought he would say, but that's not the route that he went.
It's amazing. I try to think about through Auburn history when the previous incumbent quarterback comes back for the next year and gets beat out, and I can't think of an example. I mean, I just can't. It's usually the guy that started the year before.
Sean White, kind of.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, that would be. But that was an injury situation. I think Sean White was really having a good year and separating himself before he got hurt with the shoulder, and so maybe Stidham gets brought in. But it's rare that happens. And I had somebody. I heard somebody on a national show today talk about when they released depth charts in the spring, that even if you talk about position battles being open, that's not truly the case because you have to have a depth chart. Okay, then you put or. That's what we've seen all these years, right? And we saw it with Auburn. They put Payton Thorne or Hank Brown or Walker. That's how you do it. You don't have to declare a depth chart in spring and have a true number one. And just because Payton Thorne gets trotted out there on A day, I don't know. I think it's just very hard for somebody to overtake an incumbent starter unless they absolutely look terrible. And there is a history that says it just never hardly happens.
Yeah, I think, I think right now, I'd be a little shocked if Payton Thorne wasn't the first quarterback to take the field, not only at A-Day, but entering the season based off of the comments today. It's just hard for somebody to lose their job like that. Unless unless something crazy happens, which I think would mean a lot of good things for the offense, because that means somebody's really overachieving at that point, which could happen. And then, he did add, after he answered that question, talked about how windy the conditions were at practice on Tuesday and how hard it was to throw the football. And he gave Hank Brown some love on how he was able to move the football around and specifically through the air in those windy conditions. So love to our guy, Hank Brown.
That's tough to do. Variables like that and elements with wind and rain and wet footballs and all that, it matters. Down south, we play in the SEC. The only variable or element is usually heat. I mean, you're pretty good. You're not having to worry about a lot of wind in September or cold weather, but at some point you may have to go on the road and brave the elements. And so, I think that's a pretty important aspect. And going back to the previous thing, I think I just popped into my head to answer that question. I think Jeremy Johnson lost that job in season as an incumbent starter. It wasn't like the next year somebody beat him out, but that's the last example I can think of the starter not being overtaken.
Yeah, I remember being at that presser when he announced that that Sean White would start over him. It
was at Kentucky. They played a road game in Lexington, and Auburn won. Probably the last time they've gone to Kentucky until this year. So that's kind of ironic, but yeah,
sure.
That was interesting, but I think that it just doesn't happen that often. But good for Hank Brown, to go back to the previous point, jumping back, that he can throw in the elements, and the wind was kind of brutal. And then he talked about Walker White's arm strength, that he's swimming right now was the word he used. And I'm trying to understand, you heard it. What did you take from that comment that he meant swimming?
That I think he's taken in a lot of information. I think he might have mixed up some phrases there, but that's the way I took it. The context and
head swimming, maybe is head swimming a little bit.
Yeah. Or maybe he meant to say swirling or, drinking through a fire hose. I don't know. But that's the context that I got, is there's a lot of information he's taken in. And, he highlighted Walker and he highlighted Hank, throwing it in windy conditions. He mentioned Holden a few times, at least once. He mentioned the other guys more, and it wasn't like he was asked specifically about the other guys outside of Payton. But the combination of that, and then I don't want to read too much into this, but Payton Thorne was asked about the quarterback room, and he talked about how he's buddies with most of the quarterbacks and all of that. And he's like, yesterday I was watching tape with Hank and Walker, and they were kind of picking my brain. We were just talking ball, and it's like, it just kind of feels like Holden Gardner has fallen off. It's like, where is he? We saw him at practice earlier this week, but he didn't really come up today. And I don't know if it's just because he's been here so long, and so it's not really like the flavor of the month anymore, or what, or if he legitimately needs to be counted out of the quarterback competition. I don't know what it is, Darrell, but all talks of Holden Gardner, both from players and coaches, at least as far as what we heard yesterday, they've just kind of faded away.
Yeah, I don't want to read too much into it either, but it's hard not to. The first word that comes to mind when I hear what you're describing is afterthought. And it's not the first time that happens. Let's go back to the Senior Bowl when we were talking to Hugh Freeze, and he was leaning against the brick wall talking about his quarterbacks. And you and I did a show right there and said conspicuously absent from that conversation was Holden Gardner.
Right.
I don't know. Is that a Freudian slip? Is it?
I don't know.
It means something to me if that's not that's an afterthought type of situation.
Yeah, and small sample size, but I mean, it seemed like Hank and Walker were dealing maybe the ball a little bit quicker than Holden was on Tuesday. But what we saw on Tuesday is irrelevant. But still, like the order and the talk of it all, it's just interesting. It's interesting how quickly, because it was about this time a year ago where he went out and did the whole pro day thing, and everybody's like, Holden Gardner out through Cam Newton at Auburn's pro day. And it's like, okay.
People talking about how the ball comes out of his hand differently.
Yeah. And
all that. Yeah.
Ever since that's kind of like what we've held on to when we talk about Holden. And that's not really part of the conversation anymore. So worth noting for sure. All right. There was a theme to yesterday, I think, Darrell, and I want to talk about that in just a moment. The theme. Next, right here on Locked On Auburn. Today's show is brought to you by our friends at Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Well, our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. The 2024 Nissan Rogue is perfect for city drives and great escapes. Class exclusive Google built in is your always updating assistant to call you on for almost anything. And also, look, the 2024 Nissan Pathfinder has room for up to 8, an expansive cargo capacity, and advanced available 4x4 capability. Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or the Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. Darrell, Dapprich, I'm Zach Blackerby as we dap it up on this Friday. The theme that we heard both from players and the coaches, or the coach, Hugh Freeze, was accountability. Accountability. So Hugh Freeze was asked what I think is a great question. I wish I could remember who asked it. But what's the biggest difference from a program standpoint now versus a year ago? Great question. And his answer was accountability, which is a Hugh Freeze answer. But the way he kind of added to it, I think, made a lot of sense. He says that we are now focusing on the little things more than a year ago. And we've talked about this before. I mean, Auburn, especially at times last year, I don't think they got the little things right for big chunks of the game, and especially in close games, like when you hosted Ole Miss, like Georgia at home, like the Iron Bowl. It's like you got to nail the little things to win these close games in the SEC. That's not a hot take. That's pretty straightforward. And to feel like they're better on that front than they were a year ago, I think is huge. And the accountability aspect of this, Hugh Freeze revealed a year ago that he gets these lists, kind of like these updates from the Culture Council as far as, who's doing what, and you don't want to be on the list. It usually means something bad. You got a parking ticket, you're late to a workout, something like that. And he said the lists are getting shorter now than they were a year ago. So I think that was kind of the theme from yesterday that everybody was asked about over and over and over again, accountability and leadership. And that seems to be taking place a little bit more.
Yeah, I think he's mentioned something about how they tried to coach kids into some accountability last year and it didn't work. That was so telling. But I'm going to take this a step further. He didn't say this, but I think this accountability theme, Zach, can trickle down to his coaching staff too.
Sure.
And I think that there was probably some accountability issues that he would never make public. That's not the way he is, amongst the coaches that he had problems with accountability. And that it starts with the coaches. And if you're a player and you're watching a coach, whether it's a position coach or whatever, that's not holding himself accountable, there's not accountable to the program, it's going to be hard for you who's supposed to follow that coach to be accountable as well. I think his coaching staff and the people he surrounded himself with this year that he feels a lot more comfortable with, and also his players, he feels like are getting it, and they're getting to where they want from an accountability. But I don't want people just to think it's players. I think it applies to some of his coaches too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. That's right. And somebody asked Luke Deal, who's on the Culture Council. It was Mike G. Asked Luke Deal about how if folks are late, some of the punishments they deal out are like stadium steps. How do y'all go about that? And Luke kind of like smiled and said, we don't call them punishments. We call them, what did he say? Enrichments? Like, yeah, I think he called them enrichments. And so like that, I think that was kind of funny, as far as like, it's, this is what's making you better. It's making you better internally. You were late, and so you need to be better, and running these stairs will help with that.
My coaches used to call them a behavior calibration. Or a behavior adjust. I mean, it's the desired effect is to change behavior. And I don't know. I think that's a great way to look at it. It's all about how you spin it, but
they'll be enriched with consequences.
There you go. Yeah, I like that. But makes sense. You got to have it. And I've always said that the teams that are probably championship caliber teams, their locker room culture polices itself more than any coach has to. If you have that within the confines of your locker room, you will have a very successful season.
That's right. That's right. And, Freeze was talking about even like he mentioned it multiple times. So it must have been a talking point at some point, whether it was as big of a deal or not, I don't know. But like they all agreed on like what lockers need to look like as far as the tidiness of lockers. And He mentioned that at least twice. I think it was actually 3 or 4 times. But that to me, I mean, it goes back to the little things. It's like if you do those things right, you're going to kind of,
I'm 100% believer in that.
And expectations and all of that. So everybody just being on the same page and, just taking pride in the little things. So we'll see. I mean, it's the little things that allow you to convert on 3rd and 1 at a better mark than you did a year ago.
Or stop 4th and 31.
Or stop 4th and 31.
I'll say this about the little things. I don't want to cross-pollinate sports here, but I think it applies to this for people to really get a grasp of that. I had a couple years ago when COVID hit, when I was co-hosting a show, we had Butch Thompson on for a half hour to talk about faith and little things, and how he talked about the dugout, how you should leave a dugout in an opposing team's field and your own team's field, and how it should look when you leave that stadium, how a dugout should look. It's little things like that. If people don't think that matters, but I think it builds culture. And I do believe that. I believe you take care of little things, the big things get taken care of.
That's right. That's right. And I love that. And yeah, we heard from Butch Thompson yesterday too. And obviously his team's got a big,
I don't want to steal Lindsay's
weekend
thunder
against UConn.
I don't want Lindsay coming at me with that great beard. I just,
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Players talked about the new members of the coaching staff, and we will discuss that next right here on Locked On Auburn. Today's show is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. FanDuel's America's #1 sportsbook. You can get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all of your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live save game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Or, hey, I've been saying it over and over and over again. They've got Auburn's win total set at 7.5. If you think Auburn will win more than 7 games, head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon to say, hey, I believe in my Auburn Tigers. Or if you said, hey, Auburn's still 1 or 2 years away, you don't think they win 8 games, go over to FanDuel.com/lockedon to shoot your shot. FanDuel's the official sportsbook partner of the NBA and the Locked On Podcast Network. Darrell, Dapprich hanging out as we dap it up on this Friday. One thing that came up consistently, especially to the offensive players, was Derek Nix. Derek Nix, of course, who came over from Ole Miss. I asked Luke Deal specifically, like, hey, early impressions on Derek Nix. And he said, without skipping a beat, energy. He brings a ton of energy, which I think is interesting. I think it's good. And I think it's kind of what this offense needs. I think it needs some energy. I think it needs some spark and some spunk because it didn't have that a year ago. And that's nothing against Philip Montgomery. But when you think about Philip Montgomery, who was the OC last year, you don't think of energy. Energy is not what comes to mind. And I think in this modern day game, modern college football, you want energetic and explosive offenses. And obviously a personality trait doesn't mean your offense is going to exactly be that, but I do think that's a good starting point.
I do. I remember hearing a lot about Josh Dillingham when he was coaching at Auburn, and people loved his Kenny Dillingham. Sorry, I got the name wrong.
That's not right.
There's a baseball player, I think, named Josh Dillingham. I'll just call him Dilly Dilly. When he was there at Auburn, people really loved his enthusiasm, and it was just infectious, is what I would remember. I think the same thing could be said about Derek Nix, and I also think it was very interesting. I don't know who asked the question, but kudos to them for saying, what do you think about Lane Kiffin coming at you a little bit on Twitter and daring you to hire Derek Nix?
Yeah, and JG Tate asked that question.
That was a great question.
Yeah, it was.
And Hugh Freeze, to his credit, said, I love Lane Kiffin, and I love his family, and I've been off Twitter. Politically correct answer to say, but I think that was a question worth asking because Nix has a place in all that, Derek Nix. And so, look, here's the guy.
Then he came behind and he said, but I also hired him first. So
there you go. There's a little bit of a zinger in there. I think that anytime you look at how somebody wants to hold on to a coach, what it looks like from the other school's perspective about wanting to keep them tells you everything you need to know about their value. And Derek Nix, make no mistake, for 2 years now, 2 years in a row, I think Auburn probably would have had him last year if not for some contractual things. 2 years in a row, did everything they could to keep him and hated losing him and became a little bit of a baby about it. It tells me everything I need to know. And the players talking about it just reinforces what I thought when he came over here and why he was so coveted.
Yeah. Yeah. And then obviously Ken Austin, who's been elevated to quarterbacks coach. Payton Thorne was asked about him, and obviously all the quarterbacks have a ton of respect for him. Hank Brown's talked about him some on this show too. They've got a lot of respect for Ken Austin. And then another thing real quick, Payton Thorne was asked about, his legs in the running game a year ago. And he said, I don't think I'll need to run as much this year as I did a year ago. I don't think it'll be needed with all the pieces that they have either coming back or that they've added. And I thought that was an interesting note, that this early on in the process of building this 2024 team, that's already the plan is, hey, you're not going to have to run as much.
Yeah. Again, I take that comment with a little bit of a hesitation, because I think that what he brings to the table and what makes him the most effective quarterback he can be is his legs. And why would you want to take away a tool in the tool belt that makes you a more effective quarterback? I'm not saying, maybe by design they don't have to, but and I know that he ran the ball really effectively. Now, I'm not saying as much, but to me, it's an attribute of what makes Payton Thorne his job to lose, because of the way he ran it. And I think there are going to be certain situations in football games this year where he's going to have to. So I hope they don't, completely take that out of his arsenal and they let him run when he needs to run or have more design runs, because that to me is a strength to him, to his game. And I don't know why you'd want to take something away from somebody that they do well.
Yeah. I mean, we'll see. It's like, I would rather Jarquez Hunter run it than Payton Thorne.
True.
And I would also rather Payton Thorne throw it in the direction of Cam Coleman than Payton Thorne run it. So, I mean, I think he's got weapons. And, he talked about Robert Lewis, blanked out his name for a second, Georgia State wide receiver transfer. He talked highly of him, talked highly of Sam Jackson, obviously, talked highly of Cam Coleman and Bryce Kane, all of the newcomers. He gave them all some love in different ways. So,
how telling was it when
Hugh
Freeze brought Cam Coleman up specifically and said he makes us better? I don't want to saddle him with unrealistic expectations, but that guy's different. That is really, for a freshman that hasn't played a snap in his second practice, that's very telling to me. And
it's so glaringly obvious.
It is,
Darrell. It's so glaringly obvious what this guy can be, and he could be something special. And I've said it before, we've never had something like this at Auburn before. I mean, him running out there wearing number 8, it's just like, man, this guy's going to be it. This guy's going to be it. And I don't want to paraphrase Freeze, or I don't want to misquote him, but he said something along the lines of, he allows you to do different things. We've talked about the importance of having a true number 1 wide receiver, and Auburn has that with Cam Coleman. Day one, they have it. And so I'm excited to see who else kind of next to him emerges. Is it Robert Lewis? Is it Caleb Burton? Is it Perry Thompson when he arrives in the summer? I don't know. It could be any of those guys.
I'm excited about those 3. I think the 3 you just mentioned are the ones, I've been talking about Lewis for a while.
Yeah.
I hope it's not like I did with another wide receiver where I got on a particular train and I had to get off the station pretty early. But Burton, Lewis, and Coleman, to me, bring that receiver room to a level that it hasn't been in a couple of years. And I, again, historically cannot remember a true number 1. Duke Williams could have been, probably was.
But they didn't use him that way. They used him as a big slot.
They did. Sammy Coates.
Probably the closest.
Darvin Adams in the Cam years, right? I mean, it's just, you have to go way back to the Frank Sanders years and all that. It's been a while. And so that's the exciting part about this. If you have a true number 1 game changer, program changer, finally, man, his words were, with something that he was talking about with the way he's coaching, Hugh Freeze said about coaching and potential and accountability and talent. He flat out said, we should win a few more games this year. That's exactly what he said. I mean, he declared it.
Yeah. And they should. I mean,
that means 9, right? You've won 6, you win a few more. A few's always 3 to me. Win 9. Let's go.
That'd be great.
I'll
take 9-3 right now. We'll take 9-3 right now. think that about does it. I asked Luke Deal about Rico Walker, the transfer tight end, and he kind of went into, he's fun, he's goofy, and he kind of talked about how like the team sees the tight end room as kind of the fun, goofy room. So I think that's kind of cool to see these guys as like actual people, like Luke Deal and Mike O'Reilly and Rivaldo Fairweather and all those guys. So even like when Luke Deal was leaving the room where all these interviews are, he's walking out and he walks past the table where Eugene Asante is, and Luke Deal yells, "Let's work!" And then Asante, of course, yells it back. It's just these guys seem to like each other. They seem to enjoy, spending time with one another, and that's always important.
Remember how we saw the basketball team transform from
Sure.
maybe some chemistry issues last year to this year, how they love each other and play for each other, and how there's such an improved team.
Yeah.
Maybe we see the same thing from the football team with some departures and some additions as well.
Yeah, no question. Darrell, Dapprich, how can people check out everything that you've got going on?
Follow me on X, Dap6410. Catch me here on Wednesdays and Fridays with Zach. And then after every basketball game, we go live when it hits 000.
Yes. And you can read all of our written work at auburndaily.com. Please like the video. Please subscribe. We'll see you tomorrow. This has been Locked On Auburn.